Okay, so now it's time for us to start unit testing our application. But before we do that, let's actually go ahead and run through it one more time and make sure we do any last cleanups if we need to. So let's start from the file reader. We'll click F12 on it, and let's just take a look at this. Just check the code and see if everything makes sense. So we have our file contents that we're going to be reading into and then returning. It is a generic method that will allow us to read any type of file as long as the file is valid. If not, then we'll be throwing an exception, so that's also handled. Then let's actually go ahead and check out the other worker, which is the word matcher. So we are getting our scrambled words, our word list, then we're going through each and every scrambled word, comparing it against the word list, and if they match under the same order, under the current order, then we just create a pair of matched words, which is consisting of a scrambled word and a word, which is the unscrambled word, so to speak. And then, if that is not the case, then we go ahead and we sort it out, and that's the technique that we use. So we actually break it down to a character array, we sort them out, and then we create it back into a string, and then we compare it to see if it is now in fact equal, if all the characters within both strings are equal, regardless of the order. That's why we're sorting it. So now we are doing the same thing afterwards. We're basically creating a pair, and so everything looks good. We have our helper method here. That's great. And then let's see what else we have. We have our data, which makes sense. We have our constants, which see if all the messages make sense. Oh, there it is. So we see this dash is basically doesn't have a space before it. So, we're just going to do that. Very minor thing, but, you just want to keep it clean. And then we have enter scrambled words. Would you like to continue? Yes, no. Messages make sense. Full path, including the file name. Enter words manually, separated by commas. The option was not recognized. Scrambled words were not loaded because there was an error. The program will be terminated. Match found for 01. This is templated string. No matches have been found. Yes, no, FM, and then word list txt. So this is basically the process that you want to follow after you are done with your application. Let's actually take a look at this as well. We have our file, we have our word matcher, our continue word unscramble, and that will be decided here whether we pass in yes or no. If it's no, then obviously this is going to be turned into false. And in the loop, if it's anything besides yes or no, then the loop will basically go on and on and on. And then we can see that if anything breaks in the file, then we will throw a message and the program won't just crash. We will, handle this exception. If anything happens in the file where we're trying to load our scrambled words into the application, and if that goes wrong, then basically we're going to catch that, print it to the console, and then continue on. And then we're basically going to ask the user whether they want to continue or not. So all that makes sense. Now let's actually go ahead and run through it, and this time let's try to break the program, because that's what we want to do to really test it out. So once again, I think we've ran through these test cases, but I will just do them again, just to make sure everything still works. So there you go. The option was not recognized, and you can see that we have found something. It says the option was not recognized, and this basically then goes on to say, would you like to continue? It would be better, this is not a mistake, it's just formatting issue, because you actually want your would you like to continue message to be on the next line. So the reason is because this is actually using console write, and we can pretty simply change that. So we can say write line. So these two we say write because then afterwards we're going to type in a message, but after this we want to start a new line. So these types of things are going to be difficult to catch because whether you say write or write line, both are correct. However, based on how you want it to be displayed, you might need to change around. And, by mistake, you might say write as opposed to saying write line. So that's why you always want to smoke test it. And by smoke testing it, you want to go over and test all your main functionalities to make sure that everything aligns with your current requirements. So let's actually start it up again. And this time I will say something that does not make sense. See, the option was not recognized. On a new line, it says, would you like to continue? And I will say yes. Enter scrambled words in a way where it's a file or a manual. I will say manual. And I will say something that's just not there. And it says, no matches have been found. Would you like to continue? I will say yes. Manual again, I will say Omer. And I found 2. Would you like to continue? I will say yes again. Let's try manual this time. And I will say Omer. And I will say that. So in this case, I was actually able to find it as well. Yes, and then I will say file. And in this case, remember what our file was? I will quickly show you, just to remind you what it was. Bin, debug, and scrambled words, txt. So if we say scrambled words, txt, that should work. However, what if we put in a wrong file name? So we'll say F, and then, we say something like that. See? It was able to handle the exception and then continue on the application. This is why it's beautiful when you are able to handle the exceptions in your application as opposed to just letting it crash. Because if this crashed, then the whole thing would have stopped. And then we wouldn't be able to say, would you like to continue the application? So that wouldn't be a great user experience. That would actually be a very poor user experience. And you do not want to do that. In this case, we're just printing out the error message and saying scrambled words were not loaded because there was an error. And, we're just giving them the directory that did not exist. And now we're saying, yes, okay, I would like to continue. And let's say this time I found the file and, I can put in the correct file, but I can still keep going. So in this case, I will just give it the correct one. Obviously, we will ace in this example, but I will do that. And would you like to continue? I will say no. Great. So that does it for us going around and testing it out. But now we'll go ahead and start writing unit tests for our application. But just for a second, before actually creating the test project, let's go ahead and think as to what we want to unit test. In this case, we actually would want to unit test the word matcher. And I'll tell you why in a few seconds. There are different schools of thought as to what needs to be unit tested. There are people that say that you have to have 100% coverage and everything needs to be tested. And there are some people that say only the things that are very close to the business need to be tested. So the business logic, everything that is directly connected to the business needs to be tested. Now, these are all pretty vague. It depends on a specific situation as to what the person's needs are. But whether you are going the 100% coverage or anything in the middle, or basically doing only minimal testing for the things that you need, whatever you choose, I think the correct mindset to have is that you want to prioritize your unit testing. So if you have millions of things to unit test, start from the very important one. I know this is not a very complicated idea to come up with yourself, but you would be surprised how many people miss it. You want to actually start from the very most important one. The most important one that will give you the most amount of value if it is working correctly. In our case, the business requirements and the entire application is dependent upon how we match our words. So this is very important to our quote-unquote business. That's why we want to make sure that the word matcher definitely works. If the file reader is acting up or anything else, that will still be a problem. However, we want to make sure that the word matcher works, and then we will go ahead and unit test the file reader. In this example, I won't be unit testing the file reader because I want to just unit test the most important thing that we can unit test. And in this case, it's the word matcher, and that's why I'm going to do just that. But before testing it, I wanted to give you this mindset as to how you want to go about deciding what needs to be unit tested and what not. And also, if you have a lot of things to unit test, how to divvy it up. So look at the business, look at the things that you have created, and then ask yourself, which one is the most important to the business, and start from that and work your way down from there. Cool, so let's go ahead to the Solution Explorer. I will right click on Solution, go to Add, New Project, click on Unit Test. You can also search it in here, and I will name it Word Unscrambler.test.unit. Just like we did it with the simple calculator, it's the same pattern. And let's create it. So you see Word Unscrambler.test.unit. And then we have this default unit test 1 class that is just for us to fill in. I'm going to go ahead and rename this. I'm going to rename it to word matcher test. Word matcher test. There you go. It'll change the name of the class as well. There you go. And then I want to have a reference to my word Unscrambler so that we can actually use stuff from it. But here's one thing. If we actually try to access the word matcher currently, we can't do that. So if I say private, I mean, we can say private just so that it's private within this class, and that actually makes a lot more sense. Read only word matcher, you will see that I can't access it. Why? Because word matcher is internal within this word unscrambler class. So if we go to word matcher, you will see that it says class, and internal is basically by default. It just says internal. But if we want to change the access specifier, then we just have to say public right in front of it. Now, it'll break because now it's saying, well, your entire class is public, your method is public, but this custom type that you created, that's not public, yet you're exposing it publicly. You can't do that. So you also have to make this public if you want to make the other thing public. So that's exactly what we're going to do. Save it. And, you know, it's not underlined red anymore. And also, the best thing about it is that now we can have access to it. So I will say word matcher, and if we actually hover over it, we should be able to say using, and there you go. And then I will create a variable for it. Say new word matcher, and that's it. Now we have access to it. So let's actually see what we want to test. Let's make a couple of tests in which we have a list of words as though we're pretending like we have loaded those words already, a word list and a list of scrambled words, and then pass them into the match method. Because the match method doesn't care whether you load it from a file or anything. It only cares if you pass it into it a string array for scrambled words and for words. So let's do exactly that. I will say, let's name this first. So I will name it to scrambled word matches given word in the list. So scrambled word matches given word in the list. That's our scenario. We'll say string words equals, and I will give it some words. I will say cat, chair, and more. So cat, chair, and more. And then for scrambled words, I will only have one. So it's going to be scrambled words, and then you're only going to have one thing in it for now. This is the given word, and this is going to be Homer. We actually did an example like this when we're running the program, but this is just a simulation of that situation. So then we're going to say matched words equals, here's the interesting part. We're going to use the word matcher, then we're going to call match method, and the first thing is going to be the scrambled words. The second thing is going to be the actual words, or the word list, as though we have loaded this from a word list. We really didn't. We're just faking it out, and that's what testing is all about. We're faking it to make sure that the situation works in that scenario. Then we will say assert dot is true. So we will say if the matched word count is 1, so we're expecting this to at least be 1. What? Not at least. We want it to be exactly 1, not at least be 1. We want it to be exactly 1 because there needs to be this match of OMRE to MORE. So we're going to say dot count, which is a property on our list that we can use, or any list. It's just that matched words happens to be a list. And so if this is true, then go on to another assert. Let's actually now do another assert, and we'll say is true, and we will say matched words 0th index scrambled word equals to Omer. And then we're going to say assert is true. Very similar to the one above. We're going to say dot word dot equals more. And let me go over this real quick. So all we're doing here is we're saying, okay, we loaded a word list, we loaded scrambled words. In this case, this was a manual input or this was from a file. We don't really care. As long as we have this scrambled word, in this case, there's only one. Then we're passing that to the word matcher. We're matching them up, and then we're expecting that the matcher will have one match exactly. Then we're saying if this first condition is true, then we know that it should have a 0th index. And in the 0th index, which is going to be the first and only element, we're saying that element is going to be a matched word. Remember the custom type that we made, the struct? So on that struct, we're going to have a scrambled word and a word. And we're saying if that scrambled word is OMRE, and if that word is MORE, then that was the correct match. Let's go ahead and do another one. I will go ahead and copy the first unit test. It's going to be very similar. I will say scrambled words match given words in the list. So in this case, we're going to have a scenario in which we have multiple scrambled words. So I will say scrambled word matches given words in the list. And the second word is going to be act. So there you go. Now we are saying still pass it into the match method. But in this case, expect there to be 2 matches. So that's great. Now, after we know that there are 2 matches, if this is true, then we're saying the 0th index, we're expecting it to still be OMRE and then MORE, which is basically the same thing as above. But then we're also expecting to have another match. But in this case, we're targeting the first index, which is going to be the second element. And in this case, we're saying if the scrambled word is act, then the unscrambled word should be cat. So now we have tested the functionality of a core method that is the most important to our, as I said, quote unquote, our business. So now let's go ahead and run these tests. I will go to test, run, and then I will say all tests. It'll run them all, and then we can actually go to test, Windows, test Explorer, and you'll see here we have all of our tests. You see the green check mark means that our tests have been passed, and you don't actually have to do test, run all tests. You can just, have this Windows open here to your right side, and you can pin it so that you can have easy access to it, and you can just click run all, and that'll run them all. And so that's very good to know. Let's actually click on it again. And you see that they have been passed. However, we can break one of them. Let's say instead of cat, we'll say CA. And let's run it again. See what happens. So run it. And then see, it broke. So test failed. You already know what it is. You can, see what line it broke on. You can actually see which one gave you trouble. If you click on that, it'll basically say that it broke here, and then you can go ahead and figure out why. So you can start debugging, you can breakpoint it and see where it broke. But in this case, everything works. So I will change it back to cat and then say run again, and that should do it. So once again, everything passed, our unit test passed. And remember, every time you're trying to unit test, make sure you ask yourself, what is the most important thing to the business? Whether it's a project that you're building, whether it's a work that you're doing for a client or you're doing for an employer, it does not matter. Whenever you're testing your software, and you should always test your software, ask what will give you the most amount of value.